Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of our Sustainability Series webinar. I want to thank you for jumping on the line today. This is Brendan Woodruff. I'm the co-chair of the Operations Engagement Subcommittee. Welcome again. We have a few housekeeping items and notes for you here today. The first is that this is being recorded, and it's going to be placed on the Green New York website afterwards. So if there's anything you want to go back and see, or if you want to share it with family or friends or other staff members that couldn't make it, we'll have it up on there soon afterwards. In addition, if you do have questions as we go along today, as usual, please put them in the chat box, and then we will get to them at the end. We'll read them off and get through all of them. Upcoming webinars, in February, we have one on single-use plastics avoidance, and you can register for that right on the Green New York website as well. That's a hot topic, and it's something that we can all definitely get some good tips from. And our March webinar is going to be on buying local food with Ag and Markets, who's going to talk about the New York Certified and Taste to New York program and how we can all lower our carbon footprint by buying local. In addition, I will put out a recruiting pitch to everybody here today while I've got you on the line. If you want to get more involved with agency sustainability, either at the interagency level like what we're doing here today, or within your own agency, feel free to reach out to either myself or your agency sustainability coordinator. If you're not sure who that is, that's right on the homepage of the Green New York website. You're able to find that there. If you scroll down about halfway on the right-hand side, we have a list of sustainability coordinators. You'll be able to find yours there. You can reach out to them and find out how you can get more involved. So without further ado, we'll make it to today's webinar. We're lucky to have Kelvin Karaga from NYSERDA on the line with us today, and he's going to talk about home energy efficiency, something that this time of year is top of mind. So without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, Brendan. My name is Kelvin Karaga. I am a senior project manager at NYSERDA. I've been there about 14 years now, and my principal responsibility was to develop and run the Empower New York program, which is an energy efficiency program for low-income families. My current responsibilities are I'm the technical services manager for the residential programs, for the residential small homes program. So my focus is on energy efficiency, which is a topic that sometimes is not really, it's not as, say, sexy as windmills or solar panels, but it's what we like to call the first energy, the most important first thing that should be done on residential homes whenever possible. I think of global warming, and I think about all the things that we hear every day about concerns about carbon and about melting ice and so on. And I think one of the things that's very attractive about energy efficiency work is that it is something that not only helps you in your pocketbook, but it's a real contribution towards reducing global warming risk. So it's a kind of thing that when you invest in taking care of those things in your own life or your own family, you're also doing something that's making a difference. Insulation lasts for years and years and years. I've gone into houses that were built in Brookline, Massachusetts in the 20s with rock wool insulation that's probably still in place. So the things we do for our homes, many of them have a very long-standing effect. So today I'm going to talk about, first of all, I'm going to talk about things you can do yourself that don't cost much money, no cost, low cost things. And I'll talk about some of the programs and some of the other things that NYSERDA has to offer. And then we'll answer any questions you have about your own house and about insulation and so on as best I can. So I always like to start with low-cost things because it's a great place to go when you want to get something done quickly and not deal with investment. And as it says there, you don't have to spend a lot of money to save money. And the first and most important thing to think about is how you use your thermostat. Let's go ahead there. Here's a very simple set of notes in terms of savings. We basically say, based on some research we've seen, that for every degree you set your thermostat lower for 24 hours, you save about 3% of your heating cost. And for every degree you set your thermostat back when you leave the house or when you sleep, you save about 1%. Now, if you think about sleeping especially, when I'm with my family, if my sons are home, they occupy a space that's the size of their bed, maybe 8 feet by 4, and my wife and I occupy a space another 6 feet by 8. So all of that little area that we're occupying to heat the entire house up to a high temperature is a terrible waste of money. So we basically have, like most of us do, comforters and blankets. Electric blankets work very well and, by the way, are very efficient. And we keep the heat like around 60 degrees when we sleep. That may not be what you want to do, but thinking about a low temperature is a great thing to do. And also when you're out of the house, you're here today. If your house is empty, there's no reason for it to stay cold, to stay warm. It is cheaper to warm up a house that is cool for a while than it is to keep it at a constant higher temperature. So that's the truth that really makes a lot of things possible in terms of savings. The one exception to this is if you have an air source or a ground source heat pump. The way those devices work, the temperature should not be turned down. So if that's something in your house, you want to consult with your heating technician about you handle the thermostat settings for those. But aside from those devices, it is a great thing to do to save. So here's a little sheet here that gives you some idea of what the savings can be. And this is the thing we use in our programs to show our customers what the savings can be. Let's say you're somebody who keeps the heat at 72 degrees. And instead of going at 72 all the time when you're home, you decide to set it at 68 degrees. That's what I do, and that's what my family does. And we wear maybe a sweatshirt or whatever if we feel chilly, close the drapes, and we're fine. So that's about a 4-degree reduction in this particular example. While we're out of the house, we keep the heat at 60 degrees. That's another 12-degree reduction over 8 hours. And then we're sleeping, in this example, we use 64 degrees. That's another 8 degrees. If you think each of those drops is 1% of somebody's heating bill, that adds up to about 24% of their bill. And at an average cost, or in this particular example, $1,400 to heat the house, that's over $300 in savings. How many things can you do to save that much money on your heating bill? This is a dramatic example. You may not be setting it to 72, but you can actually, do a calculation like this yourself, and it may not be $300, but if it's $100 or $150, that's money saved. And again, you don't have to suffer lack of comfort if you do it that way. So some thermostat actions to think about. As I said, turning down the heat at night is a great idea. Turning the heat down when you're out of the house for 4 hours or more, and setting the temperature at 68 degrees and dressing in layers if you need the warmth. However, one other caveat to this is if you have somebody with a medical condition, some seniors need higher temperatures, and so we got to respect that if that's the situation. And of course, to make all of this easier, programmable thermostat. Programmable thermostats are fairly inexpensive now. You can get them at some of the big bargain box stores for $30, $40 for a good make. It doesn't have to be expensive, and they're fairly easy to install. Typically, it's a couple of wires. So if you're handy at all, it's something you can do yourself, and you can set it and get those savings without having to mess around with the thermostat every time. It's a great idea to do. Of course, there are also more complex thermostats. For example, the Nest and the Honeywell has what they call a smart thermostat. Those do have somewhat more incremental savings. I would not recommend going to one of those if you've already got a programmable thermostat, but if you don't have a programmable thermostat, it's not a bad thing to do because it will give you some additional options for savings and control. You can control it on the phone, for example. So that's another way to go. So some more moving around the house a little bit, talking about the kitchen. If you don't know this already, new refrigerators use much less energy than the old ones. Some work was done in the 90s to increase the compressors and to increase the installation so that refrigerators that I used to find in those days that were running for $100 to $300 a year now can run for $50 or $60 a year. So the moral of the story is if you got an old refrigerator, don't nurse it along, get rid of it, because the sooner you get rid of it, the faster you're going to get the savings, and the new one will start to pay for itself. So a great thing to do, they're all, you can see inside the labels, they give you an idea what the usage is. You will find that the new ones, because they are better insulated, they're thicker. So as you're making a comparison, you really want to make sure you measure out the space you have and don't assume the new one will fit, because there are some differences. Very often they compensate for size by making them slightly higher, but it is something to pay attention to. And especially if you're measuring your space, be sure to measure the back of the space where the refrigerator will go, because sometimes the walls are a little bit uneven and the front may not be a good indicator. Another smart thing to do is consider your use of any second refrigerators or freezers you have. I've done a number of energy audits and gone into houses where people have maybe a six-pack of beer or two in their second refrigerator. And that six-pack of beer is costing them $120, $200 a year to keep cold. So one, if you don't have much in that second refrigerator, unplug it and put it in your primary refrigerator, because they work better when they're full. Or two, if you're somebody who does gardening, or maybe in Thanksgiving time you make a lot of food, you need to use it, just use it seasonally. Plug it in during the time that you're going to have your gardening stuff available, and then as soon as it gets small enough to reduce, put it in your primary. That's a great way to save. You don't have to give up that second refrigerator. You just kind of unplug it while you're not using it. It is also a good idea to vacuum the coils, especially if you have pets. This is usually in the new ones. It's usually underneath. You just take that little panel, and on this picture at the very bottom, you see a little dark area. That's usually a little removable panel that you can reach in and vacuum. It's not absolutely critical, because they compensate in the way they make the condensers to adjust for the fact they will be dirty. But I recommend, if you have pets or anything else that can cause a lot of dirt to go on the unit, just pull that off and just vacuum as best you can inside, and that's a great way to help make it work better. And finally, another kitchen tip that I have here is using a microwave. Microwaves only cost a penny or two a use. So sometimes if you got to heat food up or cook food, if you use a microwave, you can save a little bit of money that way too. Our typical procedure when we work with families is to adjust the hot water temperature to about 120 degrees. Now, if you're somebody who likes a really hot shower, if you were to test this in the with a thermometer, you'll typically find that a really hot shower is about 108 degrees. So 120 is more than enough to give you plenty of heat. If you have a very large family, maybe you'll have to turn it up a little bit, but we don't find that to be the case most often. So that's a good temperature to go by. The ways you turn it down is with an electric thermostat or electric water heater. There are two plates usually that you take off. You want to make sure you turn the breaker off before you do this, by the way. And then behind those two plates, you can find a dial like the one in the picture, and you just turn the dial to the appropriate temperature. Make sure you do both, because if you just do one, the other one's just going to compensate. You're not going to save anything, and that unit will probably burn out a little faster otherwise. So make sure you turn them both down. If you have natural gas, it's just a simple dial. Unfortunately, gas ones don't necessarily tell you what temperature you're going to, so you might have to experiment a little bit, maybe use a thermometer to make sure you got a good temperature. But that's a great thing to do. It also helps to avoid scalding problems if you have kids. Heating systems, getting them set up is really critical, especially if you have oil. I don't think it's as necessary with natural gas. I think every 4 years or so is fine. Oil, I have oil, we do it every year. If you have a furnace, changing the filter is real important to do. I would just check it once a month and see if it's dirty. You don't necessarily need to clean it that often, but if you find a lot of dirt in it, change as often as it takes to keep it clean for the sake of the health of your family. Also, if you have registers in rooms that are open to the basement, which you see sometimes, or if they're open to rooms you're not using, You know, for example, if you have a family member who left the house, you know, like a son that went to college, for example, to close the door to the room and close the register is a way to save a bit of energy there. I would also say if you haven't done this already and you do have your furnace, your system tuned up every year, it's not a bad idea to call the oil company or the heating company, ask them exactly what a tune-up consists of, because a heating system tune-up is a very vague term, and some heating companies do a very thorough job of it, and others do a fairly cursory job. So it's really good to know all the steps they're going to take. When I did it myself, when I picked an oil company, I interviewed about 3 or 4 of them and got their list before I made a decision. So it's a good way to make sure you get really good service. Finally, if you have a boiler instead of a furnace, there is a technique for bleeding radiators if you have tall radiators. That basically involves just making sure the air gets out of the radiators. You see, what happens is sometimes a radiator, the system will develop air, and the air will develop a pocket in the top of the radiator, so that when the water runs through the radiator, the water can't fill the radiator because the air is there, so the room gets colder. So the simple technique is you can go to a hardware store to get one of these, but there's a little key you put in, and you just turn the key with the thing running until water comes out, and that tells you that the water has filled the radiator. So if you have those kind of radiators in your house, the tall ones, and you're experiencing rooms that are cold, that's a good thing to do to get the most out of your heat. If you're changing your furnace filter, one little tip about this, there is a directionality to it, so make sure you put the right direction. If you find it's at the wrong direction already, don't turn it around, because then you're going to draw all the dirt into the house. But just a detail to make sure that when you install a furnace filter, you use the right side. Clothes washing. Clothes washed in cold water, as it says, can be clean and sanitary. I do all my washing. My family does all of our washing in cold water. Once in a while, when we're working out in the gym and clothes have been used for exercise, we'll use warm water or hot water. But almost everything we do, we use cold water wash, and it's fine. And I'll show you in a minute some of the savings you can get from that. So if you're not doing that already, this is a nice thing too, because if you're not doing it already and you're not sure you want to do it, just try a couple loads and see the result and see if you're happy. Very easy to do. Of course, whenever you wash, it's great to wash full loads or just the water level. Sometimes what we do is put a second spin cycle on, because if you spin more water out of the washing machine, the dryer, which ours is electric, by the way, runs for shorter time. So that's something you could try as well. And finally, there are now Energy Star rated washing machines, and these are basically designed to use less water for heating, and so save you that way as well. So if you're thinking of replacing your washing machine, that's a really good thing to think about. But look at this here. This gives you some sense of the approximate savings if you go from hot water to cold water. The cost, if you have electric and you're using a hot cycle on electric water heater, 15 cents a kilowatt is the average for New York State, by the way. Upstate with National Grid, it's a little bit less. Con Edison is a fair amount more. But at 15 cents a kilowatt, a hot load can cost you $1.67. Or if you switch to cold, that's 8 cents. Big difference. You got natural gas, it's even about a 40-cent difference. So you take that 40 cents times, say, 4 loads, $1.20 a week, that's $50 or $60 a year for natural gas, and as much as a couple $100 a year for electric. So there's a real opportunity there if you're not doing it already. Dryers, of course, it's very critical that you make sure the hose is not only unblocked but also code compliant. This kind of hose is no longer code compliant. It's vinyl, and if it gets blocked and it heats up, you can have a fire in your house. So be sure to check your dryer and get a code compliant hose, which is metal foil or metal, and not Mylar and not plastic. So clean your lint trap. Sometimes it helps to do a couple loads in a row if you can do it, because the heat of the first load will help the second. Using a clothesline is a good idea, although if you do it in the house, you're probably going to bring a lot of moisture into the house. So it's a better thing to do if you're dealing with a situation where you can hang them outside in the summer. And also make sure your dryer vents outside. There was a time when people would set their dryers to vent inside, thinking that if you vent your dryer inside, you're saving on heat. But when you vent your dryer inside, you're sending the lint into the house, you're putting moisture into the house, and if it's venting right in the area of the dryer, that humidity is just recycling into the dryer and making it work longer. So make sure you vent your dryers outside if at all possible. So here's some tips about just comfort in the house, making sure the windows are latched. Sometimes we forget this and we leave our windows cracked a little bit and don't even know it. So it's a good thing this time of year, especially, make sure that they're all latched. If you're somebody who has leaky windows, you could certainly replace them if you want to put the investment in your house. But if you're a renter, or if you don't have a lot of money for new windows, there is a putty you can buy in hardware stores called rope caulk that you can just put around the cracks around the windows to reduce the drafts. It's a good idea to leave a couple of windows as egress for a fire and don't putty them up. But this putty is it's like a clay that you just put on the edges of the windows and peel off in the spring, and it doesn't create any problems. I've used it for years. I'm not a renter anymore, so I don't do it. But when I was a renter, this was a way to reduce my leaking. Another thing that's very simple to do, again, if you don't have money for storm windows, is plastic sheeting. Plastic is every bit as good as the glass as far as reducing the transfer of heat through. So a piece of dry cleaner bag is just as good as bulletproof bank glass. So pick some windows. Maybe you don't want to do them all, but if you got some windows that are out of the way, that are drafty and cold, putting a piece of plastic on the inside is a simple thing to do to reduce the heat load. Weather stripping your doors, too, with weather stripping and a sweep on the bottom. Putting gaskets on the wall outlets and light switches. I will say this, though, if you have wall outlets and gaskets that are all painted up, don't bother to do this because there's really very little leaking there. And if your walls are well insulated with cellulose or something or foam, it's probably not necessary either. Fiberglass is probably still a good idea. And then also the other thing is if you got a fireplace, make sure your flue is closed. If you kept it for the fireplace for Christmas and you burned some logs, you might want to check it to make sure it's been closed once it's cold so that you don't have that heat going literally up the chimney there. Lighting actions. The big evolution of lighting, as you probably have seen, is going from something called compact fluorescents, which are still available. I still have a bunch of them in my house, but the new ones are now LED. And the LED are just a little bit more friendly to use, easier to use. And in this picture, if you look at the top picture there, this is a picture I took at one of the hardware stores of a fixture. And I actually have this fixture in my house now. What I really love is the fact that you can get LED lights that have this retro look, that look like the old-fashioned light bulbs and are very stylish and cool to look at, but they're LED and they're very low. They're like 10 watts or 6 watts or whatever you buy them at, and they provide a nice warm light and a really nice look. So if you're somebody that's concerned about the appearance, you might take a look through some catalogs and see what's available with lighting, because lighting savings is a big thing. Every bulb you reduce from 60 watts to whatever it is, 10 watts or 15 watts, it's probably in the range of about, for the bulbs you use a fair amount, $40 to $50 a year in savings. So you do a bunch of your light bulbs and you can reduce your bills by a couple $100 by doing that stuff. Obviously turning off unused lights. And as it says, I think the first bullet there, lower watt lights close to the task. What we see sometimes is kids that are doing their homework and they've got the overhead light on and it's a couple 100-watt light bulbs at the top of the room, where if they just had a little desk lamp with a little 10-watt LED light that's as bright as a 60-watt right on their work, then they're cutting down on the bill. So that's a great thing to do. Night lights instead of higher watt lights at night. The ones with sensors especially are very good. and also an outdoor light that has a motion sensor and a sensor that turns it off at sunrise. Very nice way to make sure you have security without leaving your lights on all the time. Shower heads are another opportunity, and this is a little trick I learned from someone a few years ago, is if you want to know whether your shower head should be replaced, basically just cut the top off of a milk jug, turn the water on for 20 seconds. If it fills within 20 seconds, that means it's 3 gallons or more of water a minute, because 20 seconds times 3 is 3 gallons. So that's a quick way to test it that doesn't cost anything. If you find it's high, there's many new kinds of low-flow shower heads and handheld shower heads and all kinds of stuff that has a much lower volume in the range of 1.4 to 2.1 gallons a minute. So that's a real nice way. And you can enhance your lifestyle a little bit if you don't have a handheld and you find something nice on the market. That's a nice way to have your cake and eat it too. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about programs, because there are programs available through NYSERDA that can help you if you want to go farther. If you're looking at, I'd like to get my house better insulated, I'm not sure what to do. First of all, we have a program. We have 3 programs at NYSERDA we call our residential existing home programs, which are all being combined right now into one. But essentially, they work at 3 tiers of income. The Home Performance with Energy Star program is our market rate program, and it's for people at greater than 80% of area median income. And this is, if you go on our website, on our NYSERDA website, you can look up your income and see where you qualify. But if your income is in that bracket, we have contractors that they get a 10% incentive to help them with some of the work we require them to do. But basically, they do a comprehensive home assessment, we call it. They evaluate everything on the house, the insulation, air leakage, which is a real important thing that is a little, it takes the device called a blower door to really measure to see how it is in your house, but measuring how leaky your house is, assessing whether it's worthwhile to add more insulation, assessing your heating system, looking at your lighting, and so on. So they're available to do that. If you're somebody whose income is less than 80% of area median income, then the Assisted Home Performance Program pays 50% of the approved measures. This isn't everything, and the measures that we have picked, because this is money through the Public Service Commission, and we pick measures that are going to be cost effective. So it's not everything you could do, but it's insulation, it's heating system upgrades, it's air sealing, it's all of those things that can reduce your bills. And finally, for people that are below 60% of state median income, and this is equivalent to, if you know it, HEAP eligibility, those folks, we offer services at no cost. And there are a number of services. We have a budget to put in each house at no cost, and then if they have additional services they want, they can go through Assisted Home Performance and pay 50%. But we typically will do at the house, we'll do either attic and or wall insulation, air sealing, heating system upgrades, lights, appliance replacements, and so on, as needed in the house. So those are some programs to keep in mind. Some caveats about them is you don't need to be owner occupied. It can be done on rental property. When we deal with multifamilies with the Empower program, we typically do electric reduction measures only, although we have another program that does multifamily and does whole house, does the whole building. You have to be an electric customer of one of the utilities to participate in these, and although there is some limited funding from muni customers as well. I think I went over all this, so I'll skip it. And this is how you apply. I'm sure you're going to make this available to everybody, right? Yep. So I won't go into the details now, but you will find as you look this webinar up, you'll see the details on how you can get to those programs. Finally, a couple of things I want to mention briefly before I close, that there are some new things that are evolving that are very exciting. One of the really big initiatives on the state level is the recognition of the need to reduce carbon. So there is a big push on a couple of technologies that are very exciting: ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps. And these are devices that take the heat out of either the ground or the air, and it's similar to the way a refrigerator works, but in reverse. A refrigerator draws the heat out of the space inside and sends it out into your kitchen to cool your refrigerator. And the reverse happens with an air source heat pump. It draws air from outside. And amazingly, these devices, some of them will draw heat out of the air at temperatures below zero. They still have some effect, although there gets to be a point where they're less cost effective to use. But it's a great technology. Right now, we offer contractors who install these a $500 incentive, which they typically pass on to the consumers. And with ground source, this is a very exciting technology that's being used around the world. There are skyscrapers that heat and cool the entire building by wells drilled underneath the skyscrapers. A lot of great work being done. It's a fairly expensive technology yet, but with all the incentives and things that you get, including up to a $15,000 incentive through NYSERDA, it brings the cost down to the range of about $15,000 or so. So that if you're somebody that's planning to replace your oil system and you're going to do it anyway, and you're going to spend $8,000 doing it, if you spend the extra money, you get the savings that's created by the ground source heat pump, and you're ahead of the game. So more is going to be developed about this, but it's something to keep your eye on, especially if you're planning to make any changes in your heating system over the next few years, because our hope is that we can get rid of a lot of the gas and the oil and the propane systems and get everybody electrified and have electric that runs by windmill or whatever, so that we get to a sustainable world for our kids, which is really the goal of all that. And then there's also a solar program that also has funding available, and some people are finding ways to combine heat pumps with solar and putting the investment in there, so the ultimate is they're in very good shape. Finally, there's one other program that I want to mention. That's the Renewable Heat New York program, which offers savings for switching over to more efficient biomass boilers. There's a lot of people in the North Country that use wood stoves, and they're really inefficient. So it's still a carbon fuel, but if we can reduce, for those people that are using it, their needs by putting them on pellet stoves that have a higher efficiency, then that's also a good thing to do. So if you're somebody in that kind of a situation, you might want to take a look at that. All these programs have quality assurance. So we do a certain % with each program of inspections, and part of my job is, when it comes to the home performance program, I work with my team to make sure that the work is done correctly and the contractors are doing what they're supposed to do. So there is protections there available through NYSERDA. So that's it, and I'll turn it over to Brendan for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation, and one of the things you touched on there was kind of the need to electrify everything as we go forward with the ground source and air source heat pumps. And it's really exciting that we're finally to the point where we have this technology. You know, we've been talking about solar and wind in the electricity sector, and we've been talking about electric vehicles in the transportation sector, electric buses and stuff. And now we finally have you know, technologies that are out there to help us when it comes to heating our homes and buildings.
That's the future. You know, that's what's going to save kids, is getting that stuff running.
Yep. So a couple questions here. If you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box as we go along. The first one here: would you suggest Energy Star for other appliances that are not just washing machines?
Yeah, I think Energy Star generally is a good thing to look for. With some cases, it's not. You know, for example, with televisions, my understanding, and my understanding may not be complete in this regard, but televisions are getting more and more powerful, and the Energy Star component typically has to do with how they shut down when they're not used, not that it reduces the amount of energy they use when they're being used. So that's a good thing to be mindful of as you buy yourself a nice big set. Is the way you're going to save energy on that is just not leave it running when you're not watching it, and There are timers, for example, you can get so that if somebody falls asleep with the TV on, it'll go off. So Energy Star light bulbs, that's a good thing to look for. Energy Star refrigerators. I don't think they do freezers yet, but it is a good thing to, it's a good simple way to identify products that are going to save you money.
And I do have to ask the question, since it is a federal program, have there been any changes with the new administration and the EPA and changes that have happened there to Energy Star?
I don't know if anything is happening in terms of enforcement. I know that it's still in place. So they're still putting out the standards, and we're still finding whether or not there's a lack of certain research or not. I couldn't tell you that.
Okay. Is it better to set a temperature range so that your systems can flex with nature's variety?
That's a hard thing to do. I mean, I would say that, you know, first of all, if you get a smart thermostat, it adapts to your usage, and so it does some of that variation. I think, though, when it comes to setting a temperature in a house, there is a reality that your house doesn't stay constant at that temperature, because sometimes in really cold weather, you can have a situation where the balance between the cold coming in and how the distribution of the house works creates more variance in the house than you would have otherwise. So it is fair to say that even though keeping your heat, we constantly tell people to keep your heat at the same constant temperature, there are times when in a really cold day, turning it up a few degrees may be worth doing. Turning it off if it's springtime, like some people do when it's certain days of the year, they say, okay, this is off, I'm going to leave it off till the summer comes, and we'll be fine. So that's the best I could tell you about that.
Would you suggest Energy Star for other, oh, okay, I think we already did that one. Let me see here. Okay, we've got a bunch coming in. Let's see. How low should I set the thermostat when I'm away for several days?
I would say that, you know, 62 or so is probably fine, and it kind of depends on the makeup of your house. If you have a house that is just basically a nice rectangle, shoebox shape, where there are no extremities with pipes in them, which is your typical basement, that'll do fine, because you're leaving yourself with about, what, if I say 62, you're saving yourself probably about 30 degrees, because what you're really concerned about is the extremity of the basement where a pipe could freeze. So that's typically fine. If you have a house with a, you know, say a pipe that goes to the far end of a grandfathery house with 4 or 5 extensions, you might want to set a little higher. However, I will tell you, we're not experiencing in the program and all the stuff we've done over the years, we're not hearing complaints about freezing problems with that kind of a strategy. So I would say, you know, 60 or 62 is probably just fine.
Is covering through-the-wall air conditioners cost-effective?
It kind of depends. I think definitely, you know, typically yes, because you can just basically put a cover over it. It is a thermal transfer point if it's cold. So if you're somebody that's smart, that's good at carpentry, I should say, and create a box that's insulated around it, that's probably a real good thing to do to reduce your heat loss. How much it saves, I couldn't tell you. But at least putting a loose cover on them is a good idea, because it reduces the leakage that goes through it. But it kind of depends on the situation, because if you have a house that is very tight already, that air leakage might be okay. Typically, though, I'd say it's a good idea to do it.
What is the best way to find a home energy auditor, especially in regards to outside of New York?
Well, I don't know other programs. I do know Mass Save in Massachusetts has a whole system, and I don't know how what's not clear to me is whether or not they give you the choice of energy auditors or not. I would, though, if you're looking, you could certainly look this stuff up online and ask them, if you have a sense of what I've said so far and what you've learned from other places too, that to ask questions about how long do you take to do an audit, do you use a blower door? I think it's important if you're looking for just an energy audit to make sure that it's not a salesman, that it's somebody who specifically focuses on energy auditing as a profession, and they're going to give you the information, and then you choose your contractor. Now, in New York, we actually combine the two, but we have strict rules about making sure that the contractors provide a full menu of options. But if you just call somebody, you might end up with a company that wants to sell you what they want to sell you rather than what you want to need, what you need. So, just, I would say go online, Google Energy Auditor, and wherever you're looking at it, find out what they say about themselves, look for that independence, look for a description that includes running a blower door, testing your heating system, doing health and safety checks, probing your walls for insulation, and then you're probably on to somebody good.
Do you have any suggestions for efficiency during the summer cooling season?
Well, yeah, basically a couple things. One is to keep first of all, if you can get away with fans rather than air conditioners, that's great, because if the fans are a lot cheaper to run than air conditioning. So that's a good thing to do. Letting the breezes run through your house, especially after the house cools off, is a good idea. Insulation. If your house isn't well insulated, when you insulate your house, it works both ways. It keeps the heat out as well as keeping it cool inside. And then setting your temperature, I think 78 is what's recommended for cooling, but making sure you don't set the temperature any lower than you really need it to be.
Do you have any suggestions for things to look at with lower cost programmable thermostats in terms of options and things you'd want to see on it?
I would want to see, and these things are typically available on most of them. First of all, I would want a big screen. I've got one in one of my parts of the house that I've had for years. It has a very small screen, and I got to pull a flashlight out every time I want to read it, but it still works, so I keep it. So a nice big screen so you can see the display, especially if there are any seniors or folks like that. There are ones that have especially large numbers in those situations. You want one that will have settings for each of the 5 days of the week and the weekend as separate, so that you can say, and depending on your lifestyle, if you're somebody who has different work hours, for example, you might want to set different times. You want to be sure it has an override so that if you're home sick for the day, you can easily just switch to keeping the temperature you want. And also there are, and this is, again, typical for them, they typically have wires for heating and cooling and so on. So I would look for those features.
We have a finished basement that we heat in the winter. 2/3 of the wall is cinder block type and exposed to the backyard. We lose lots of heat through that wall. Do you have any suggestions on how we can reduce the heat loss and their renters?
Your renters?
Yeah.
Ooh. I have to tell you that many mistakes are been made and probably are being made in terms of foundation walls. The classic approach over the years was to put fiberglass up against it and then put plastic on the inside, and it's a terrible thing to do, because cinder block walls they're sponges. Moisture just goes through them, and when you put stuff up against them, like putting say you put a row of studs against them, then it just gets into the wood and rots the wood and gets into the insulation, creates mold and must. Treatment now for cinder block walls is typically contractors will put a moisture barrier on the inside and then foam insulation. You could try, if you're renters and you want to spend a lot of moolah on it, you could try getting some foam board that has a vapor barrier on one side and fixing that to the wall insulation at the time you're there. But it really takes some very careful surgery to do it correctly if you own the house. And in that case, I would typically recommend you consult with a contractor that's knowledgeable. But please do avoid putting fiberglass and studs against that wall, because it's just not going to be good in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And that's the last question we have. So I want to thank everybody for jumping on the webinar today. Again, this is being recorded. It will be put on the Green New York website, and we'll have that up there soon. So any final words or thoughts?
No, thank you all for your time today. And I didn't talk much about do-it-yourself, but certainly a lot of these things are very do-it-yourself, insulation especially. And the one last thing I'm going to say is that when it comes to attic insulation and ice damming, the most important thing is to make sure that all of the air passages from the house are sealed below the insulation. Many people go to getting their roofs fixed, saying, "Oh, I got an ice damming. I'm going to put some insul shield on my roof." That's a Band-Aid on the problem. The best approach, and I've done this myself, is you go up in the attic, or you hire a contractor to go up in the attic, and they find all the places where pipes and wires come through. They weather strip the attic hatch. They go around the edge of the attic where the what we call the top plates, where the walls meet the ceiling. Sometimes there's a gap between the ceiling and the studs because things shrink over time, and you seal up all those cracks, and that reduces the path for humidity and warm air to get into the attic. You insulate the attic and you ventilate. If you're having an ice damming problem, and those are the steps to take, A, because they solve the problem rather than just put a Band-Aid on it, and B, they also give you the added benefit of reducing your heat bill. So that's my last tip there.
Fantastic. And with that concludes today's webinar. Thanks again. And the next one is in February is going to be on avoiding single-use plastic. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye now.